First, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm working to try and obtain a substantial amount of information relative to water and water economics, particularly in this region, for about the past 6 months. However, we've been sort of doing these type of analyses for the better part of the past 20 years. In the state of Utah, recently we've been looking at the Lake Powell Pipeline project and down in Washington County, and work for the state relative to the economics associated with energy policy statewide. So we completed that analysis last year. Had the opportunity to work with resident groups and elected leaders and some folks up in Salt Lake City relative to some hearings that they had there. But at the end of the day, the fundamental question that's before us today is, what is the economic value of water? It seems like a relatively straightforward question to address, but I think in doing so, sometimes it's not always as apparent as we think. Think about what a parcel of land is worth, either in terms of agriculture or business or recreation or a home, absent having sufficient water to turn it into some type of beneficial use. Across the United States, there's been a great deal of discussion as it relates to water economics, and water policy. Some of this has had a result of water quality issues that have developed recently, particularly in the Midwest and the eastern portion of the country. But also, more so in the western United States, the ability to have water sufficiency. As you all are probably well aware, and we'll talk about it a little bit today, western United States continues to be, even with all of the rain that we have recently received, in what is a record drought by almost every measure. Colorado River and other water tributaries in the western United States are not generating as much as they had hoped. If we think about the upper and lower Colorado regions, the amount of water that is flowing through has become decreasing, making it increasingly problematic. So the law of the river and what happens there is probably beyond our discussion today, but nonetheless has made it a federal issue in some ways, as well as a state's issue. Almost every state in the United States, not the least of which is California, which today is the 7th largest economy on planet Earth, right, and is developing huge amounts of water resources, not the least of which is a plant being developed for over $1 billion in the Carlsbad area to try and desalinize and bring in water to try and help alleviate some of the major problems that that region is having. Communities across the western United States are spending multiple billions of dollars to secure their water rights. So are individuals that are holding them. They are procuring them for the sake of concern that if they don't put those water rights to what is productive use, that they may ultimately lose them. Agriculture in particular has become somewhat concerned about this, because a lot of the dialogue, discourse with regard to water is not only about conservation. How do we get more out of every gallon or every acre foot that we utilize, but also what is the differential in terms of productive use? What does one ERU, equivalent residential unit, get you? What does it get you in terms of gross output? What does it get you in terms of population growth? What does it get you in terms of how many acres you can essentially grow or develop as a result of that, a fraction of an acre that you can grow? The return on the water investment has become the underlying metric that almost everywhere in the western United States is starting to use to determine whether or not we should be more concerned about water overall. Now, the charge that we are looking at is largely Central Iron County and what is happening here. So I will spend a fair amount of time on that. But it seemed germane to our discussion today to at least begin with an understanding that this is not a Central Iron County problem or a state of Utah problem. It is a national problem that we are dealing with. Our population is simply outstripping the amount of water resources that we have in many areas of the country. So national water concerns and areas of need. The Governmental Accountability Office, which is, of course, the folks up in Washington, D.C. that do analyses about anything that has to do with our nation, says the future freshwater shortages are expected, but planning is complicated by uncertainty related to freshwater availability and use. Right? What they're saying is that states across the United States have plans to essentially develop water resources and ensure sufficiency. But those are being affected by everything from climate to population growth and where that's shifting. If we look at it in terms of drinking water infrastructure investments that are required over the next 20 years, or the total amount of infrastructure that will ultimately need to be replaced, those numbers are $384 billion and $1 trillion respectively. In the state of Utah, if we look at the state water plan and all of the infrastructure that has come forward, that number is measured in the $30 to $40 billion range, depending on what set of statistics that you look. But these projects and this problem are almost uniformly measured in the billions of dollars. Across the United States, the American Water Works Association does a survey. And in that survey, they ask water managers across the entire country, some 1,400, 1,500 of them, I forget the total number. They survey them relative to what are the top issues that are out there. What are the problems that we're dealing with? Number one, and these are in no particular order, but these are the top ones. One, renewal and replacement of aging water and wastewater infrastructure. Those are the numbers that I just showed you. Financing for capital improvements. Why? Because some of the financing tools that used to exist do not exist anymore, and the ability to essentially leverage existing revenue sources is problematic. Long-term availability of water supply for two reasons. Number one, in the western United States, the population is migrating to the west, particularly the retiree migration that is continuing to migrate even faster. And in addition to that, existing water resources are essentially not as robust as they used to be. I overheard some conversations about the Colorado River and how much it's supposed to be producing and how much it's actually producing. I was in one legislative hearing up in Salt Lake City where the chairwoman was talking about the fact that we cannot continue to let more water than we are required to continue to flow down the Colorado. And I think that's relatively accurate. Anybody want to hazard a guess? What is the most common age in the United States today? Right? If you add up all the people, what age do the most people have? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
32.
32, fair guess. Anybody else? All right. You guys are having your lunch. Clearly the presentation and a quiz isn't out there. As a matter of fact, the most common age in the United States today is 24 years old. It's the most common age. Second most common age is 25, and the third most common age is 23. At the same time, the baby boomers are starting to age out of the population. The echo boom is coming on the back end of that. It's creating a remarkable dynamic where you have the two fastest growing shares of the population are folks over the age of 65 and folks under the age of 18, right? Which is sort of weird because people over the age of 65 don't really like people under the age of 18. But as we continue to kind of move through that, we understand that this long-term availability of water is sort of shifting based on people that are staying in a location and the need in order to diversify those water resources combined with new growth that's happening because you have this echo boom of the population overall. Public understanding of the value of water systems and services. This has become remarkably problematic overall for the simple reason that people have taken water for granted. We were talking about it just a moment ago. Right? People have just become accustomed to the fact that water is at a relatively low cost, or that water is abundant, or that if I connect a new subdivision or I move into my home, that every time I turn on the faucet, it's going to run. And then public understanding of the value of water resources itself. The underlying commodity has been viewed as almost free overall. How much does the general public really know about water? Almost nothing. You could survey them. They know very little about water quality, water sufficiency, where water comes from, or what it ultimately means to them. If we talk about it in terms of water overall, chemical spills, point source pollution, and combined sewer flows are the three things that come up most often nationally. They are almost all related to water quality, and of course some of the things that have happened recently in areas like Michigan have made these heightened concerns overall. If we look at it in terms of the articles that have been written across the United States, it is almost uniformly about drought and large rings around different areas, but water quality has dominated, absolutely dominated the media over the past year. People are concerned, increasingly concerned, not only about water sufficiency, but also about the underlying quality of that water. This is projected domestic water use in gallons per capita per day and projected population change by 2030. Again, the map gets somewhat complicated overall, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. But you see the areas that are in dark blue in terms of where the demand for water is likely to increase most by 2030. You will notice, of course, that Utah is on the map. Not surprisingly, Nevada is as well. So the other side of it, if that is the issue, if the sufficiency of water is the issue, if the issue is about people understanding the water as an economic resource, we must then ask the other side of the question, and that is, how is the demand for water? What is the demand for this resource? And we can carve it up any way that we like, but I am a numbers guy by training, and so I like to think about it in terms of ones and zeros, right? So if we think about the economy, the population grows, and population will tend to migrate to where jobs are being created. And so let's take a look at Utah's economy overall and ask the simple question, is demand going to continue, or can we expect that the water resources that we have today are going to carry us all the way through because it almost doesn't matter, right? That essentially growth is likely to stop. Well, of course, that's not the case, but we'll talk through it here for a moment. So here's population growth between 2014 and 2050. You'll see Utah there is the 6th fastest growing state in the United States. You will also notice that population growth is favoring the western United States. But growing at 1.7% is relatively robust. In terms of population overall, just to put these numbers into perspective, the United States average relative to population growth is 0.8%. Utah's population is growing twice as fast as the United States as a whole. And we'll get to looking at Central Iron County and Iron County as a whole. But nonetheless, just to paint the picture. Again, Utah has the 6th fastest growing population, 2014 to 2015, up from the 7th fastest in the prior year. North Dakota is the #1 fastest growing area in the entire United States, which was a remarkably unfair comparison because nobody actually lives in North Dakota, right? So if we look at that here in terms of North Dakota and Utah, North Dakota ranks #1 in population growth over that period because it added 16,887, and as I understand it, some cattle, which they are trying to count as population growth. And then you have the state of Utah, which grew at 51,421. So even if we look at it from a pound-to-pound standpoint, Utah's population growth substantially greater. Here's what Utah's population growth has looked like since 2000. So over the past 15, 16 years, population has added 751,000 people, or about 33% of the population just since the turn of the century, right? That is substantial overall. Now at 3 million people, the punchline here, if you want to think about it, is that is arguably among the most consistent rates of population growth you will see anywhere in the entire country. Why are people moving here? For many reasons, not the least of which is Utah's employment. Each one of these months represents 12 months of employment. They're just rolling each month over and over and over again. You get the idea. You see the recession there in the middle. You see the boom, then the recession, and you see where the state of Utah is today. From the low point of the economy, Utah has added 210,000 jobs, 17.8%, ranking it among the most prolific economies in the United States today. Again, states like Nevada, for example, haven't even gotten back up to their pre-recession peak, where states like Utah are well beyond that total overall. As a matter of fact, the state of Utah is adding jobs at a clip slower, I guess that you'd say, faster than all but 2 other states. You see those 2 up there that are growing a little bit faster in terms of Oregon and Idaho, but nonetheless, Utah remarkably robust in terms of population growth. The darker the color, the faster the growth. So if population is growing and if people are moving to where jobs are and where opportunity is, you can see what it looks like. The United States as a whole has been doing much better over the past 12 months, grew at 2% on average. The state of Utah growing by about a third, or let's call it a little more than a third, faster than the United States as a whole. The conclusion is the expectation that Utah is going to continue to outpace the national average. And I think as a state, certainly it's come out in some of the governor's comments, and certainly in other counties in the state of Utah, the fundamental underlying question is, can we make do with what we have? There are those across the state of Utah that would suggest that you can make do. We just need to conserve more. We need to get more out of every acre foot we demand. We've got to drive down gallons per capita per day. And I will tell you that that group of folks is absolutely right. That will, however, not be nearly enough to fulfill the demand for water in this region. Where is Utah's population growing? Leisure and hospitality, trade, transportation, and utilities. Those ones down at the bottom, only 2 sectors reported negative employment growth during the past 12 months. And the only reason that I put this slide up is to show that this economy is diversifying faster than almost any economy of its size in the United States. That's a pretty strong indication that it's not a single sector, but multiple sectors that are going to drive the economy forward. 44,000 jobs created over the past 12 months places it again in percentage growth rates of close to almost everywhere else in the United States. In addition to that, we take a look at the unemployment rate, now at 3.5%. So we are clear. The rate at which economists generally believe that every person has a job who is looking for a job is about 4.75%. So the state of Utah is actually under what we would like to see in terms of full employment of the economy. The United States average is 5% in this regard. So at 3.5%, what can you expect to see? Number one, wage inflation. We're already seeing it in the state of Utah. You can also see a deficit of qualified folks. You can also expect to see an increase in the number of people quitting their job. You're actually seeing all 3 of those things today. Of course, some of those that are in there in the Midwest, we've seen a substantial amount of the energy economy booming, more construction driving folks to those areas, also dealing with some increases in wage inflation. As of March 2016, Utah had the 9th lowest unemployment rate in the country, down from 5.5% a year ago and 8% in February, down 5.5 percentage points from the peak of 8% in February of 2010. In terms of recovery and performance, you'd be hard-pressed to find other states that are doing a whole lot better, which is bringing more folks into the state of Utah. Here's Utah's unemployment rate. You see the peak. You see where it is now. This is the United States as a whole. Excuse me, I hit that a little too quickly. This is United States as a whole. Utah, again, performing remarkably well. This is personal income. Not only are we seeing more population and more employment, we are also seeing incomes rise overall. As a matter of fact, between 2009, arguably the low point in the recession, to where we are today, that income is up $28.7 billion, outstripping even population growth during the period. Now, of course, that has some inflation built into it, but nonetheless, when we're talking about water resources and protecting the economy as it currently exists, that's substantial. Personal income per capita, again, of course, these are measured in thousands. You see where Utah is. Why? Because the average household tends to be larger, meaning that the average income per household tends to be a bit lower. Nonetheless, even this has moved up somewhere. Taxable retail sales, remarkably important relative to overall economic growth. Just show that for a second, is up 34%, outstripping even the amount of income that has been generated during the time period. We boil it to its absolute essence, it comes down to this. Utah leads the United States, or is near the top of the United States, in terms of the best place to start a business, the best place to do business, and the best place to work. As a matter of fact, it ranks 2nd for the second year and 5th time since 2010. Again, it has been among the top for many, many years overall. Utah ranks number 1, gross state product, annual growth, what they're doing. Again, it all points to the same conclusion relative to the fact that are water resources in the state of Utah going to be sufficient if the economy continues to grow? The idea, of course, being that water resources should never be the reason for artificial growth in the economy overall. People tend to laugh when I put this up on the screen. Utah also ranks among the nation's highest in terms of the happiest places to be. Right? I am from Las Vegas. I grew up there. My family's been there since 1905. We put the same measure up for a place like Nevada. It is among the lowest places in the United States. And for that reason, if you survey the population, it has a tendency to have the fewest number of people that were born there that actually live there. As a matter of fact, Las Vegas and Nevada is the lowest in the entire United States relative to the people that live there now that were physically born there. Utah is the opposite. Right? It has a tendency to have among the nation's highest rates of retention in terms of the population. So, if you're going to gravitate, if people are going to gravitate to Utah because of the amount of jobs, if retirees are going to move into the state of Utah because of the quality of life, and if the people that are living here today are going to stay because they like it, the idea that the existing water resources are going to somehow stretch into perpetuity seems to me to be, at best, wildly optimistic. Utah has a number of competitive advantages. This is nothing more than summarizing the slides that I just told you. Number 1, among the strongest economies in the United States. 2, among the most diversified economies of the United States. Number 3, strong cluster development and commercialization of research. I'm not trying to get overly complicated here, but the university system is doing remarkable things in terms of retaining some of the best talent and developing new technologies. Highest rates of population growth, but more importantly, highest rates of population retention. The best and brightest are staying. They're having families, and their children are staying as well. All of that had to do with the demand for water resources. The other side of the equation is the supply side. Okay, we all agree. There's people here, they need water. There's businesses here, that those businesses need water. The combination of those two things means that the demand for water is unlikely to go down. As a matter of fact, we agree as a general premise, the demand for water is going to increase. What about the other side in terms of water resource risk, right? Where is the water going to come from, and can we rely on existing water resources? First and foremost, I would suggest to you that drought is the biggest fundamental problem that we are dealing with. Right? I'm not here to make commentary on anything related to global warming or anything along those lines. Okay? Some scientists much smarter than me can determine whether things are actually getting hotter or whether they're not. I remember being a kid, and at that point in time, everybody was concerned about the next ice age hitting. I don't know which one's right and which one's wrong, but what I can tell you is that things are hot, and when it's hotter, evaporation happens faster, and when evaporation happens faster, things like the Colorado River and the Virgin River and those type of things do not produce as much water as they might otherwise. Combine that with the fact that population is moving this way means that the demand and the supply are having problems, particularly in places like Southern California, San Francisco, previously in some areas of northern Nevada in particular, have had huge problems. Now, with regard to the water that has dropped out of the sky as a result of El Nino, that has been a wonderful thing. That is good. But you don't get 10 years worth of below average precipitation just because you have 1 year that is going to be, by the time it ends, probably 111% of average. Will mean that across the western United States, we are still in a deficit position, even with a relatively good year for snowpack and water being dropped. Highlighting for a moment just the west, those red areas are hugely problematic, right? And most of them are in California. Some of them get into northern and northwestern Nevada. You see Utah and the problems that are going on there. But these are, at a bare minimum, abnormally dry conditions that are causing concern overall. When we got done looking at Washington County Water Conservancy District and the expectation and looking at some of the other issues surrounding it, we had to build into models 5, 10, and 15% reductions in water productivity from existing water resources, because that's what communities are doing across the United States for the primary reason of insulating themselves from some type of water instability that would put those resources at risk, right? Because I can't build water resources, I cannot build water infrastructure overnight. It takes time. And if all of a sudden you hit something that's problematic and you don't have enough of a buffer, you're in bad shape overall. Right? If we look at the state of Utah from a supply side, 2,100 lakes, 89 miles of river, but it is the second driest state in the entire United States. I did have one legislator one time tell me, look, we have all of this water. We have 2,000 lakes. We've got to have plenty of water for everything we want to do. I think that is part of the misunderstanding that goes to where water is, how you get water to populations, things like that. What are the major uses of water? We think about the state of Utah as a whole. How is water used, right? You see that the vast majority of it goes into some type of environmental ground recharge. It falls from the sky, it drops into the ground, and it goes back into the environment. Agricultural depletions are number 2 there. That's the 4.5%. Municipal and industrial depletions is what we all spend most of our useful life talking about, at least in this type of discussion. And then you see wetlands and net outflow and potential developable supply, those type of things that exist there. This is the problem overall. And at the end of the day, I would love to tell you that technology is going to solve all of our problems. We're going to capture more of this water. We're going to use it more effectively. We're going to do all kinds of things in order to make that work. But that in and of itself is only part of the solution. The timing, the difficulty, the quality of that water, accessibility to it, all matter in terms of actually being able to deliver water resources. So we'll focus for a moment, on these pieces, the agricultural piece and the municipal and industrial piece, which is the part of the sliver, the part of the pie that frankly, consumers and voters and businesses and banks and financiers and business folks all care about. And if we look at that in terms of just that piece and we explode that pie into what it looks like, agriculture makes up 82% of that total. You see residential indoor use, residential outdoor use, commercial and industrial use make up the balance. And this here is the problem, right? At least on the surface, it is the question people have, right? The problem is that there are 2 groups of people in the world. There are those that understand the agricultural economy, and then there is everybody else on the entire planet. The folks that understand agriculture understand that it is a core element of the United States economy and Utah's economy. They understand that for generations they've been cultivating water use and all of those type of things, water development and water supply. All of the other folks look at agriculture and say, wow, that seems like a pretty inefficient use of water. Maybe we should go and require agriculture to use less because, look, it's such a giant opportunity to do that. And in the western United States, if you go from Colorado to Nevada to California, you will see that the conversation is almost uniformly switched to return on investment for every gallon that I consume or every acre foot that I consume. What do I get for every acre foot? What do I get for every gallon of water that I consume in terms of jobs and wages and salaries and households and all those type of things? What do I get back? And by that single argument, agriculture is a relatively inefficient use of water from that particular use, unless you think about the fact that the economy in and of itself is interconnected. And it is. And the idea that I would go to someone that has, for generations, developed a farm and say, I'm going to take 20% of the acre feet that you have in water, and I'm going to charge you more for the water that you are then going to use as a result. And then I'm going to take that additional water so I can use it so that someone else can move into the community, so I can build new houses or, new whatever, as a result of that, seems to be remarkably myopic economic policy. There is no doubt that we are going to have to figure out how to more efficiently use every acre foot that we have. But abandoning our agricultural economy or believing that agriculture is somehow the answer to all that ails us is completely misguided. If we think about it in terms of gallons per cubic meter of fresh water, and forgive me for converting to the metric system, but if we use World Bank statistics, it's the only way to go. So in the world, what do we get in terms of productivity, GDP, for every cubic meter of fresh water that is consumed? You get 14 bucks. If you look at Utah, it's $25, Arizona, Nevada, the United States, and ultimately California. If we think about it from an economic output standpoint, what am I getting for what I'm putting in? Utah is less than these other western states. It is less than the United States. It is less than the state of California, which is going to mean that the federal government is going to start to focus with laser-like precision, particularly as other states deal with their water problems, about, is Utah an efficient user of water? That is where the argument is ultimately going to go. Now I'm going to exclude irrigation from this. Here's the United States, here's Nevada, here's Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and ultimately California. So even if I take ag out, it does do better than Nevada, but not quite as good as some of the other states. And this is where, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe that the discussion is ultimately going to shift. So demand is going to happen anyway. Supply is going to be a function of who can utilize the water the best, right? Some folks talk about it in terms of being a riparian state. I'm not going to get into all of the legalities of it all, but this is what it is. Productive use of water matters, but that is broadly defined and should include agriculture and irrigation, not ignore it altogether. From a supply side, the fundamental reason that I'm here today, why Paul asked us to go through this exercise, and why I was asked to come and present here, is largely about the concept of what happens to a community when water shortages occur. And I'm going to show you just some of this from areas across the United States. I've put way too many of these to make it meaningful, but I'll just make a couple of points and just show you how many communities have had to deal with this particular problem. United States as a whole, water shortages. We look at Florida. Impacted agriculture, impacted fishing and employment and all of those type of things. In 2007, governor says we've got to change what we're doing. And is there any state that is more agriculturally oriented than Florida? There are, but only a couple of them. We look at Alabama, affecting energy infrastructure. Why? Because main water thoroughfares that were used to generate energy had declined. You look at the state of Nevada. Potential water shortages in 2008 negatively affected the economy. Meant they could not develop golf courses anymore. Matter of fact, it's almost impossible to develop a golf course. We had an increase in fires. As a matter of fact, Pat Mulroy at the time actually threatened to stop signing subdivisions because we did not have sufficient water. It ultimately led to going deeper into Lake Mead and drawing down waters at a lower level. Thank goodness that it did, because Las Vegas is almost at what is the 1140 threshold, which means that the pipe that you pull water in that gives that water to the Las Vegas Valley would be essentially consuming all the gross stuff that is on the top of that particular reservoir. California. State of emergency is declared in 2009. Of course, this has happened again. Avocado farmers are forced to have what was some of the worst crops. They require people to start moderating when they use water, both indoors and outdoors. We have surveyed folks across the state of Utah in different places. Everybody likes the idea of conservation until they actually have to think about what it means. Right? You're telling me I'm going to have to pull trees out of my yard? You're telling me I can't have a swimming pool? You're telling me I can only have so much turf? I'm all for conservation when it means using a low-flow toilet. I'm in. I'll replace it and I'll do it. You ask me to do almost anything else, I'm out. Right? The next guy, they can conserve more. In the state of California, of course, they've done some wild stuff there. Arizona, same thing. Colorado, drought-plagued agricultural producers throughout the entire state. They actually started seeing a wildlife decline and migrate out. Low lake levels in Oklahoma stopped fishing and recreation. Las Vegas, New Mexico, one of my personal favorites, stops outdoor watering, right? That'd be pretty fun, right? Let's go through that particular little exercise of getting rid. Swimming pools were no longer allowed to be filled, and they actually, has to be the dumbest policy I've ever heard, required people to start using plastic forks and knives in order to reduce total water consumption. I don't know what that's exactly going to get you, but apparently they were really trying to push the envelope. Kansas, in terms of agriculture, the middle Mississippi has actual barges that are running aground as a result of decreased water. Nebraska in 2013, agriculture and declines overall. New Mexico, drought, all kinds of stuff we've already talked about. In 2013, most of the folks in here will probably remember all of the fires that were taking place. Huge negative economic implications, not only for the regions in which real estate was being put at risk, but also as a result of the recreation that was taking place. And if we don't think recreation matters in the state of Utah, probably this community, as much as any other, recognizes what the importance is of those outside dollars coming in to the state. The Colorado River, of course, facing its worst drought in a century. I didn't understand exactly how they measured that. Apparently, they cut down the trees and count the rings and look at the distances. But the drought is the worst that we've seen in hundreds of years. Texas, facing an unquenchable water demand, is going to spend $2 billion to shore up water resources in Texas. And how did they get it done? Purely based on economic development. They knew that if they did not have stable and secure water resources, that their economy would be put at risk. 2015, California enters its fourth year of severe drought. It's now measured in the billions, job losses, in excess of 20,000 jobs as a result of the drought in that region. Contiguous United States from September to November was at 56.8 degrees Fahrenheit, 3.3 degrees above the 20th century overall average. That may not matter, it may change next year, but what it does mean is that at least recently things are hotter than they were before across the entire country, meaning more evaporation and less water at the end of the day. So what is the bottom line from the supply side and the demand side? Number one, water resources are an essential element of economic development and diversification. There is no doubt about that. If this community or any other in or out of the state of Utah expects that economic development is going to be part of the future plan, the absence of water resources will be problematic. Go to the Wall Street Journal. Go to the 10Ks and Qs that are published by companies that are expanding. They will put down as a material risk water resource development. We do a fair amount of that in the western United States, and it is probably the second question that most businesses that are considering relocating into the Mountain West will ask. Number one is, how deep is the employment pool? Do they have people that are technologically ready to be employed? And number two is, do I have to worry about water resources? Ensuring water resources is critical to protecting the state's economy and this community's economy. Again, I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever. When we talk about water resource diversification, it needs to come from multiple places. The fact that we're not just talking about the next folks moving in, we're talking about protecting the people that live in Utah and Central Lyon County today. A comprehensive master plan approach is necessary and appropriate. We've had a fair amount of discussions over the past 6 months about the concept of water rights and paper water rights versus actual water rights and developed water rights versus undeveloped water rights and all of that. Right? Water rights can be owned by any number of folks that can develop them at any number of times. The idea that you are going to solve a community's water problem by this guy developing a couple hundred over there and this lady developing a couple hundred over here without having a master planned approach is simply a fallacy. It just will not work that way. A comprehensive master planned approach is both necessary and appropriate to ensuring both water sufficiency, but also the connected nature from an efficiency standpoint in terms of maximizing the output of the water system without maximizing the cost of the water system. So let's talk for a moment about water in Iron County, at least as we understand it at this point in our process. The Water Master Plan Report, of course, in 2014, comes out and essentially says we've got this problem. And I would suggest that this problem from where I sit, this problem is really substantial. Everyone has told me, hey, look, it's not quite as bad as you think that it is. From an analyst's perspective, from an outsider's perspective, it's pretty dang bad when you start essentially, this is, the water economics here is almost like my brother-in-law uses his savings account, right? He thinks, he's told me one time, if I have checks, I have money. Right? No, you don't, right? The idea that you can continue to spend down that savings account to a point at which you don't have anything left is problematic. And that is essentially the way this community is operating. Depleting a reservoir of water, an aquifer, to such a point that we don't exactly know when it's empty. That is a dangerous game to be playing, and I would suggest that it's particularly problematic. And at least according to this report, that rate of decrease is at 160 acre-feet per year and is accelerating by about 20 acre-feet per year. Again, we can go in and determine whether that's accurate or inaccurate. We can argue whether it's accurate or inaccurate. What we do know is that those depletions are happening relatively quickly. The present condition, the future expectation, all of this coming down to the idea of exactly what I just showed you a moment ago, and that is the demand is increasing because population is growing. That means the demand for water is going to increase, and but for incremental water resources, you will have to deplete an aquifer that is indefinite in terms of we don't know exactly how far you can go before you run out of the water that is there. This is arguably the scariest chart that I have seen in a year, and you all can tell me why it's not scary, and I will certainly listen to you. That little orange line along the top reflects essentially the groundwater level. The blue line represents the historical water level from 1940 to 2065. Yep, it's been declining, and will continue to decline because the darker blue line represents the expected population growth. Right? I like to think about that as the blue line of doom. Right? Because sooner or later, you're going to get to a point where the depletions in that water level are going to become a problem. I can't tell you whether it's tomorrow, or 10 years from now, or 25 years from now, but what I can tell you is that sooner or later, like my brother-in-law, you're going to get to a negative balance. And you will probably hit water quality issues before you ever hit sufficiency issues, but it will become increasingly problematic. Uh-oh. My little clicker stopped working?
Ran out of water.
Yeah, that's it. You got it. All right. I don't know why. Oh, here it is. I see what the problem is. Click on that. There we go. So, Iron County's economic climate. Now, I spent a lot of time, I just wanted to lay the foundation for that particular problem. And now I want to talk about Iron County's specific economic performance and condition in comparison, because I gave you kind of the state of Utah, but from a demand standpoint, I need to bring it in up here. Right? So these are sort of the key economic indicators. And I could have put 25 of them up there. We just put these ones up there. Population growth, employment, unemployment rate, wages and salaries, how many establishments, how many businesses are operating in Iron County. And this compares against the peak, the highest point in history, sometimes during the recession, other times afterward, and then where you are today. So peak versus present. You see there's some red down there. The employment hasn't gotten back to peak levels. Okay, establishment count is a little low. That's consistent. But in terms of population overall, it's the highest level it has ever been in history, at least based on what is generally reported out there. Same thing's true with personal income and per capita income and weekly wages and some of those other things. That is important. Okay, not back to where we were at the highest rate. What about if we just look over the past 12 months to see where the economy is trending in a positive way or in a negative way? And I'm not going to go through each one of these statistics, only to say that every one of those little green arrows on the far right-hand side is going in a direction that suggests the economy is expanding. Where here do we get that deficit condition relative to water is not going to get worse? Right? Every year it is going to get worse and going to get worse and get worse because we're essentially depleting it at an increasing rate, because the unfortunate fact is that population growth is going to mean increased demand for those water resources overall. You'll recall what we looked at when we looked at population growth. I just wanted to show Iron County, which is actually growing at a faster clip than the state of Utah. So the state of Utah is among the fastest growing areas in the United States. Iron County among these growing faster than that overall. A period of slowdown happened here between 2010 and let's call it 2013, 14 and 15, sort of regaining, sort of regaining that population overall. This is Iron County versus every county in the state of Utah. Forgive the small font, but you have a lot of counties in the state of Utah, so I had to try and get them all on the paper. But if we look at the growth rate relative to all of the counties in the state and where Iron County fits in, again, pound for pound, among the fastest growing anywhere and among the fastest growing states. The overall was 33.5%, Iron County the 8th fastest overall. So you say you're getting a 10 percentage point premium in terms of the speed of growth. How exactly is it that the game plan is to continue to use the same water resources? A little bit beyond me. And that population growth appears to be actually increasing at an increasing rate, at least over the last couple of years. Now at 2.3%, that population growth, again, you will recall the national average in terms of that population growth is about 0.8% overall. So let's just look at the exact same thing. 8th fastest, Utah average 1.7%, growing at half a percentage point faster than the overall average. Now, of course, the governor's office on management and budget, I think that's what the planning budget, management budget, whatever they call themselves these days, is showing that population growth out into the future. But nonetheless, if we look today, that population growth is relatively strong overall. What about the labor force? Still down about 5% from where it was at the peak. Again, growing by an increasing clip on the right-hand side. Not bad. At an 8.2% back since the lowest point. We'll take it. And then we look over here. And all this is doing is looking at labor force employment and comparing every month to the same month of the prior year. You see what the recessions look like leading into and immediately following the events of September 11th. There was this little echo decline here in 2003. That's what the Great Recession looked like. And you see a period of 30 consecutive months in which job growth has been there. This community was slow to come out of the economic downturn, but it showed stable development going forward, at least suggesting to us that the demand for water is by no means going to get slowed down very quickly. This is Iron County, the United States, and what it looks at how it looks relative to the United States in terms of the unemployment rate, well below the unemployment rate, almost at the full rate of employment overall, or very close in terms of what's seasonally adjusted. We look at wages. No, I'm sorry, I jumped over that a little quickly. Wages continue to increase, suggesting incomes are rising. This is average weekly wages at the highest level they have ever been. And if we look at the areas where those wages are and how they're developing, financial activities, manufacturing, construction, natural resources, and mining, all doing fairly well overall. Number of establishments, which dropped like a rock during the Great Recession, has increased back up to about 1,435, still down about 150 businesses from where it was when the economy was at its highest. Again, 76 from the low point. We look at the establishments by sector in terms of how the economy is broken down: trade, transportation, and utilities, business and professional services, construction, and education round out the top four. The economy is not as diversified as the state of Utah, but does see some increases in diversification. Additional services, additional development, meeting the demands of additional population growth. The Cedar City micropolitan statistical area, in terms of population increase, has added $693 million in spending potential over the past 15 years. This is why additional businesses have moved in. If we compare the growth rate against the state of Utah, Cedar City is actually, the micropolitan area is actually outpacing the state of Utah relative to personal income growth. Same thing in terms of per capita income, the size of the households, and we compare of 9,000. Probably better to look at it here. Again, outpacing the state of Utah overall. Conclusion here, increased growth is likely to take place. Iron County's water demand, what do we see when we start to put this issue that we're dealing with combined with supply and demand, and we try to layer them together? This is the population growth trend. And I would love to tell you that I came up with the population growth trend, but I did not. we utilize the growth that is projected by the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. Of course, they put out the official population estimates. And again, we took those out to 2060. We then used some internal reports to get to 2070 and 2080. Don't worry, it doesn't matter by 27 and 2080 because you've run out of water long before we ever get all the way out there. Where we are today is seeing this growth, and I will argue these two bars are the ones that matter the most, and maybe that one. Why? Because the rate at which population growth is expanding is increased over the past 10 years at a slightly increased rate, and is expected to do so when the next census comes out. If we look at projected annual water use, non-agricultural water use, municipal and industrial water use is how you may think about this. This blue area represents that from 2010 all the way to 2080. Wow, it's a long time out there. Right? None of us will actually be around, except maybe some of these young ladies right here in the front, to actually see how that all plays out. Maybe Paul will be around. I guarantee you I won't be. But you see how it all kind of goes out there to the right. The idea that water is going to continue along those lines, of course, is one that we need to keep an eye on. When we think about the agricultural component, of course, we think about agriculture in multiple different ways, right? If we think about projected annual water use, this is agricultural. You see it added up with full water right utilization. We're essentially utilizing everything that's out there, assuming it all comes to fruition, and no conversion to non-agricultural uses. If we have a conversion to non-agricultural uses, we essentially hold it flat where it is today, and then we have a conversion to non-agricultural uses where we actually decrease the size of the agricultural economy or require agriculture to become more efficient in terms of every gallon or acre foot that they ultimately consume. So if I add those two together, I get a curve that looks something like this. And this is, at least what we can anticipate, to be the demand for water in the region, approaching 30,000 acre feet. Today, the increase in agriculture as all of those water rights are theoretically developed, and then as those water rights are theoretically developed, we get past that, and then it continues on into perpetuity. We look at the no conversion alternative, and then we look at the conversion alternative. Any of the three of them, you continue to ramp up. It's just an order of magnitude relative to how we think about agriculture in the region. So we balance then the supply with this demand for water. Sustainable, safe yield is 21,000 acre feet per year. This is the amount that I like to think about as renewable, reliable water resources for the region. It's 21,000 acre feet. Then you've got the aquifer depletion. This is essentially we are spending down our savings account to see how far we can go before it becomes a problem. It's about another 8,500, wherever you want to think about that acre feet, depending on the period. And then there's this gray area, the black area at the top, is the additional capacity to reach what are the paper water rights of about 50,000 acre feet. Now, I will tell you, those are paper water rights. The extent to which they will actually be developed and be part of the municipal system, in my mind, at least from an analyst perspective, is at best questionable. So this is the area that we are safe with, and we are already demanding more than that because of the depletion that you see in that gray area overall. This, in and of itself, I would argue, is an immediate problem for the region. I will then layer on to the top of this those demand curves that I just showed you. Right? The idea that this is what the demand is likely to be for that water. Okay? A couple of things jump out at us as being potentially problematic. Now, I am actually holding consistent this water aquifer depletion under the idea that essentially spending more money out of your savings account is a little bit of a dangerous game. It becomes progressively more dangerous as you go forward, respecting the fact that anything that is above this would either have to come from one of these two groups. Either you start to deplete more than you are depleting today in hopes that you don't run into water quality or sufficiency problems, or number two, you believe that some of those additional 29,000 acre feet of water rights could somehow be procured, wrangled up, and developed into the water infrastructure without causing all kinds of problems. Even if we make both of those assumptions by 2042, you've run out of water altogether, unless you sort of imagine that you have increased conservation, essentially decreasing water use per capita by another 25% by 2050, again, having gotten to the governor's 25% by 2025, and then extending it another 25%, that'll take you out to 2057 with the level of growth that is projected. All of that needs to be viewed through the lens that anywhere that orange line goes above that gray line is, at least in my mind, potentially problematic for this region. That is to say, you are already in an area that for any other part of the country we would consider a danger zone. There are two elements that we have looked at relative to the development. There's actually others, but two that we have focused on in terms of the development of new water resources. One is in Pine Valley, the other one's in Walwell Valley, 15,000 acre feet and 12,000 acre feet respectively, with the idea that prudent water management policy would be to not continue to deplete and utilize those additional 50,000 acre feet as a resource that would shore up any shortfalls that might otherwise exist. I've then added that additional capacity at the top, believing that it is at best a question mark in terms of how much you can get from those particular water rights. I certainly would not rely on them. So what would be renewable, reliable water would be the safe yield you have today, the Pine Valley, and the Walwell to get you the total amount of water. I will then layer on the top of that the water that you have in terms of what you are likely to demand over time. Now granted, maybe we take agriculture out of this, maybe we add it in. Lots of assumptions that we can ultimately make. But if we take that basic line that was the total amount of water that's theoretically going to be demanded, you see that even bringing on Pine Valley, essentially all it does is get you to that line so that you're not depleting more. And Walwell Valley doesn't get you a whole lot further, because by the time you bring it online, at least in this particular model, you are already demanding more water than is there based on expected rates of population expansion and additional development needed for agriculture and other non-M&I uses. Again, I don't know any other way to say it other than this is potentially very problematic for the region. So here's historical projected running deficit. This is where I started the discussion, essentially 1940 going all the way forward to 2070. Zero is the aquifer deficit in terms of when you start to go down. You see where you are today, approaching 400,000 acre feet have been taken out of that aquifer without being essentially replaced. If you want to think about it those way, estimated 375. We sort of show where it's going to go at the current rate that you're running. Right? We then bring online other ones, projected aquifer balance with no water projects, no additional conservation or ag conversion. You get kind of a sense how we can make it worse than it is there. Oh, I gotta hit this. Sorry, it's just, no, it's not that, it's just this guy. For some reason, it just wants to turn off, right? So then we look at it with no projects, no contribution, new ag is introduced. Essentially, I'm just looking at those various agricultural alternatives that we looked at earlier, including 15,000 acre feet from Pine Valley, 12,000 acre feet from Walwell Valley, no additional conservation, no ag conversion. You are already continuing to deplete. Here's where we start converting agriculture in some ways and increasing conservation, ultimately bringing it back, and ultimately bringing it back here if we do everything along those lines. Again, these are the engineering guys' estimates. I think they did a remarkable job in showing it. I'm just showing you that the deficit gets worse before it gets better, and the only way it gets better is if everything we just talked about all of a sudden comes to fruition. Right? So there's all of the different alternatives that essentially begs the question, how much risk are you comfortable with? Right? How much are you comfortable with relative to that water? In addition to measuring the impact of the running deficit, what are the implications, of course, on groundwater levels? There's the growth that you see. There's the decline in terms of the aggregate deficit overall, in terms of how much it decreases over time. A very complicated chart just to try to complete the circle that the deficit is a substantial problem. If we evaluate the alternatives, right? We start with the least aggressive strategy, which is no new water projects, no additional conservation efforts, no agricultural conversion, agricultural use increases to provide water rights. This will increase the deficit to 1.7 million acre feet by 2070, even if these things are done, right? You get the idea of the current deficit, how much it's going to increase over every 9 years, and then ultimately the 2025 deficit. We then look at the most aggressive strategy, bring in water from Pine and Wawa valleys, perform Coal Creek recharge projects, conserve an additional 25%, convert agricultural water use. This will relieve the water deficit by about 2066. My guess is the proper solution is going to be somewhere in between those two, because the least doesn't resolve the major problem, and the most aggressive is probably going to lead to some additional problems in the agricultural economy. In looking at it from an economic standpoint, the simple ones and zeros of it all, what does it mean? Here's the population, the households, the employees, the number of businesses. Personal income in the region is $1.3 billion. Gross output is about $2.3 billion a year. That's the sum total of everything that's being sold and developed and all those type of things in the community. If we divide that current demand by municipal and industrial use, by agricultural use, or by the combined use, we get the multipliers that show us how much population can be supported depending on each acre foot that is ultimately developed. This is an oversimplification of something that is much more difficult, but it does provide some way of looking at it. Right? If we imagine developing the Pine Valley future supply, the future supply from Wawa Valley, or the combined supply, can actually increase the population of the region, holding everything else constant, support another 43,000 people, another 14,000 households, another 18,000 employees, another 1,200 businesses, and $2 billion worth of economic output. But for this, you're going to finance the same growth, which we certainly expect to happen anyway, with essentially increasing water deficits from an aquifer that is not being replenished. Again, a huge problem, not only for the folks that are here, but these new folks that would consider moving in. More aggressively, if we think about it in terms of utilizing new water resources only for municipal and industrial uses, as opposed to utilizing them for other uses, you see from Pine Valley, Wawa, and what the total would be with the potential of increasing the population or supporting an additional 165,000 population, 54,000 households, 4,883 new establishments, and about $8 billion worth of economic growth. Again, some of that is going to happen anyways. You saw those two lines start to cross. The only question is, at what point do water resources essentially run out? Either because the existing M&I is insufficient, or because the bank account that we've been relying on begins to run dry or become problematic. Again, I'm sorry, I know I went about 10 minutes, probably longer than I was supposed to, but hopefully that provides you a little overview in terms of what the issue is, where we think the supply side and the demand side are coming together, and why we believe there's an acutely problematic issue existing in this community today.